sound of quills scratching on parchment, a lone candle flame flickering. Imagine, for a moment, the quiet of a late 18th century room. The only sounds are the scratch of a quill on parchment and the distant, muffled echoes of a world reborn. The thunder of cannons has faded. The smoke of revolution has cleared. But the air is thick with a different kind of tension. This is America, not as the superpower we know it, but as an infant nation, blinking in the harsh light of its own newfound freedom. The war was won, the impossible achieved. A ragtag collection of colonies had stared down the mightiest empire on earth and declared its independence. But victory on the battlefield was only the beginning. Now came the harder part. The question that hung in the air, debated in taverns and town halls from Boston to Savannah, was a monumental one. What now? How do you build a country from scratch? How do you take the soaring ideals of liberty and equality, for which so much blood had been shed, and forge them into a government that could actually function? This was the great, terrifying experiment. The founders, men like Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Adams, weren't just politicians. They were architects of a new reality. They knew that the freedom won with muskets and cannons could easily be lost to chaos or tyranny. The initial attempt, the Articles of Confederation, was proving to be a fragile framework. It created a league of friendship among the states, but it left the central government weak, almost powerless. The nation was adrift. States bickered over borders. The economy was in shambles, and foreign powers watched from across the Atlantic, waiting, perhaps even hoping, for this audacious American experiment to collapse under its own weight. The dream of liberty was at risk of becoming a nightmare of anarchy. It became painfully clear that the spirit of '76 needed more than just spirit to survive. It needed structure. It needed a rule book. The liberty that had been declared in Philadelphia and defended at Yorktown now had to be enshrined in law. The passionate cries for freedom needed to be translated into the careful, deliberate language of a constitution. The nation stood at a crossroads. Down one path lay disintegration and failure. Down the other, a more perfect union, a future still unwritten. The sound you hear isn't just ink drying on a page. It's the sound of a nation trying to write its own destiny, to build a government that could secure the blessings of liberty not just for themselves, but for posterity. This was a moment of immense peril and profound hope. The challenge was to create a government strong enough to protect its citizens and hold the Union together, but not so strong that it would crush the very freedoms it was meant to defend. This delicate, almost impossible balance between power and liberty is the heart of our story. It's a debate that began in those candlelit rooms over 2 centuries ago and continues to echo in our lives today. How much power should a government have? What are the unassailable rights of an individual? These weren't abstract philosophical questions. They were urgent, practical problems that had to be solved if the United States was to survive its infancy. As the summer of 1787 approached, the nation's greatest minds prepared to gather once more in Philadelphia. They were not there to lead armies, but to wield a different kind of weapon, ideas. They came to argue, to compromise, and to create a document that would become the bedrock of American democracy. They were about to embark on a second revolution, a revolution not of swords, but of words. This is the story of that struggle. It's the story of how a fragile republic, born from revolution, fought to define itself and create a government unlike any the world had ever seen. It's a story of brilliant, flawed men grappling with the biggest questions a society can ask. The quill is poised. The parchment is waiting. A nation holds its breath. The first words are about to be written. Join us as we journey back to this pivotal moment to explore the conflicts, the compromises, and the incredible foresight that gave birth to the United States Constitution. This is the story of how freedom was not just won, but secured. Thank you for watching. If you find this journey through history as fascinating as we do, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more. Your support helps us continue to tell these essential stories. We'll see you in the next chapter. Welcome back, history buffs, to our deep dive into the story of American liberty. In our last episode, we saw the 13 colonies declare independence, fueled by a powerful desire for freedom. But winning a war was one thing. Building a nation was a completely different challenge. Today, we're jumping into the whirlwind of the late 1780s, a time of intense debate, brilliant ideas, and profound anxiety. This is the story of how the United States Constitution was born, and the epic clash of visions that nearly tore the new nation apart before it even began. Imagine this. The war is over. The British are gone, but the country is a mess. The first attempt at a government, the Articles of Confederation, was incredibly weak. The central government couldn't raise taxes, couldn't fund an army, and couldn't stop the states from squabbling like rival siblings. It was becoming clear to many that this loose confederacy was on the brink of collapse. Something had to be done. So, in the sweltering summer of 1787, delegates from the states gathered in Philadelphia. Their initial goal was just to tweak the Articles of Confederation. But a few bold visionaries, like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, had a much grander plan. They argued that a simple fix wasn't enough. What America needed was a brand new framework, a strong, effective national government that could unite the states and command respect on the world stage. This secret meeting would become the Constitutional Convention. For 4 long months, these men debated, argued, and compromised behind closed doors. They hammered out a revolutionary document, the United States Constitution. It was a masterpiece of political engineering. It created 3 distinct branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, with a brilliant system of checks and balances to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. It established a federal system, where power was shared between the national government and the state government. This new government could tax, it could regulate commerce, it could raise an army. It had real authority. But when this new constitution was revealed to the public, it triggered a national firestorm. Why? Because as groundbreaking as it was, it had a massive, glaring omission. The document meticulously laid out the powers of the government, but it said almost nothing about the rights of the people. There was no mention of freedom of speech, no freedom of the press, no right to a fair trial. For a nation that had just fought a revolution against a tyrannical king to protect their liberties, this was a terrifying oversight. This omission sparked one of the most important debates in American history, pitting 2 opposing groups against each other: the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. On one side, you had the Federalists, led by intellectual giants like Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. They were the champions of the new Constitution. They believed a strong central government was absolutely essential for the nation's survival. They argued that the country needed order, stability, and a unified economic policy to prosper. To make their case, they wrote a series of 85 brilliant essays known as the Federalist Papers, published in newspapers across the country. These essays explained, point by point, why the Constitution was not a threat to liberty but its greatest protector. They argued that the system of checks and balances and the division of powers was itself a built-in protection for individual rights. Interview listing out specific rights was unnecessary and even dangerous, because what if you forgot to list one? Would that mean the government could take it away? They believed the government was limited to the powers explicitly granted to it, and therefore, it had no authority to violate rights. It wasn't given power over in the first place. On the other side were the Anti-Federalists. This was a diverse group of patriots, including famous figures like Patrick Henry, the man who famously declared, "Give me liberty or give me death," George Mason, and Samuel Adams. They were not against a national government in principle, but they were deeply suspicious of centralized power. They had just thrown off the yoke of a powerful king, thousands of miles away. They went about to hand over their hard-won freedoms to a new, potentially tyrannical government right here at home. The Anti-Federalists looked at the Constitution and saw the potential for oppression. Where was the guarantee that the government couldn't silence its critics? Where was the protection against a standing army being used on its own citizens? Where was the right to a trial by a jury of your peers? They wrote their own passionate essays and pamphlets, arguing that without a specific declaration of rights, a Bill of Rights, a constitution was a recipe for tyranny. They believed that human nature was such that those in power would always seek to expand their authority, and the only safeguard was to explicitly write down the lines that the government could never, ever cross. This wasn't just an abstract philosophical debate. This was a central conflict that has defined the American experiment ever since: the eternal tug-of-war between liberty and authority. How do you create a government strong enough to protect its people and promote the common good, without making it so strong that it threatens the very freedoms it was created to defend? The Federalists argued for authority. They saw chaos, economic ruin, and foreign threats looming. And they believed a powerful, energetic government was the only answer. Order was the prerequisite for liberty. The Anti-Federalists, on the other hand, championed liberty. They remembered the abuses of the British Crown all too well and feared that history would repeat itself. They believed that the greatest threat to the people came not from foreign enemies, but from their own government. The debate raged in state conventions across the country, where delegates were elected to vote on whether to ratify or approve the new Constitution. The vote was incredibly close in many key states, including Virginia and New York. The fate of the nation hung in the balance. The Anti-Federalists' greatest weapon was the fear of a new tyranny. The Federalists' greatest weapon was also the fear of anarchy and the complete disintegration of the United States. In the end, a crucial compromise was reached. In order to win over the skeptical states, the Federalists made a promise. They pledged that if the states would ratify the Constitution as it was written, the very first act of the new government would be to consider and pass a series of amendments to protect individual liberties. This was the turning point. This promise was enough to sway the moderate with the understanding that a Bill of Rights was on the way. The remaining states, one by one, voted to ratify. The Constitution was officially adopted, and the United States of America, as we know it, was born. But the debate was far from over. The promise of a Bill of Rights had to be kept, setting the stage for the next chapter in our story, the creation of the 10 Amendments that would become the bedrock of American freedom. The great debate between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists wasn't just a historical argument. It's a conversation that continues in America today. Every time we discuss the power of the federal government, the rights of the individual, national security versus personal privacy, we are echoing the voices of Hamilton and Henry. The tension between liberty and authority, first articulated in 1787, remains the central, defining challenge of our republic. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the heart of American history. The story of our freedoms is complex, dramatic, and more relevant than ever. If you found this interesting and want to learn what happens next, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode, where we'll explore the creation of the Bill of Rights. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. The ink on the Constitution was barely dry, but across the 30 newly independent states, a murmur of unease was growing into a roar. The war was over, the British were gone, but the ghost of their tyranny still haunted the American people. This wasn't just a political debate among men in powdered wigs. It was a deep, gut-level fear that festered in the hearts of ordinary citizens. They had just thrown off the shackles of one powerful, distant government. Were they about to forge new ones for themselves? This is the story of that fear, the fear that gave us our most cherished freedoms. Imagine a farmer in the rolling hills of Massachusetts. He wakes before the sun, his hands calloused from the plow, his mind still scarred by the memories of redcoats marching across his neighbor's field. He'd fought, he'd bled, he'd sacrificed for the idea of liberty. Now he hears whispers from Philadelphia of a new federal government, a government with the power to tax, to raise an army, to make laws that would reach all the way to his small plot of land. To him, it sounded terrifyingly familiar. He'd look at his children, playing in the yard, and wonder, did I fight a revolution just to replace King George with a president in a faraway capital? The fear wasn't about politics, it was personal. It was the fear of losing his farm to a new tax, his son to a new, standing army, his voice to a government he couldn't control. This wasn't an isolated anxiety. In the bustling print shops of Philadelphia and Boston, the air was thick with the smell of ink and the heat of debate. Printers, the lifeblood of the revolution's communication, were setting type for fiery pamphlets. They remembered the Stamp Act, the British attempts to censor their presses and silence dissent, a new constitution with no explicit promise to protect their freedom of speech, their freedom of the press. It felt like a betrayal. One printer, leaning over his composing stick, might say to his apprentice, "They speak of we the people," but they forget what the people truly fear. He knew that a government, any government, without explicit limits, would eventually seek to control the narrative, to quiet the voices that challenged it. The press had been their sword and their shield. They weren't about to hand it over. And what about the soldiers? Men who had shivered through the winter at Valley Forge, who had left their families and their livelihoods to face the most powerful military on earth. They were returning home, not to a hero's welcome, but to a new political battle. A veteran, perhaps missing a limb, sitting in a tavern, would hear the arguments for this new constitution. He'd remember the Quartering Act, being forced to house British soldiers in his own home. He'd remember the arbitrary searches, the seizure of property, the feeling of utter powerlessness. The proposed constitution said nothing about preventing this from happening again. He'd slam his fists on the table and declare, "We didn't face cannon fire to give a new government the power to break down our doors in the middle of the night." Their demand was simple. Tell us, in black and white, what you asterisk and not asterisk do to us. This collective fear, this shared trauma of oppression, wasn't just idle chatter. It galvanized into a powerful political movement. As the Constitution was sent to the states for ratification, the real battle began. Special conventions were called, from the rocky shores of New Hampshire to the fertile plains of Georgia. These weren't quiet, orderly affairs. They were passionate, loud, and deeply contentious. Farmers, merchants, lawyers, and veterans delegates representing the full spectrum of American life gathered to decide the nation's fate. And in every single one of these conventions, a single, powerful demand echoed from the rafters. Where is our Bill of Rights? In Virginia, the powerful oratory of Patrick Henry, the man who had famously declared, "Give me liberty, or give me death," now thundered against the Constitution. He saw it as a blueprint for a new tyranny, a betrayal of the Revolution's core principles. He warned his fellow Virginians that they were naively surrendering the very freedoms they had just won. He painted vivid pictures of federal tax collectors bleeding the people dry, of a standing army oppressing the citizenry. His voice resonated with the deep-seated fears of his audience, turning the Virginia Convention into a nail-biting showdown. In Massachusetts, the debate was just as fierce. Delegates from the western farmlands, many of whom had participated in Shays' Rebellion just a year prior, an uprising against economic and civil injustices, deeply suspicious of a strong central government. They demanded concrete assurances. Samuel Adams, a firebrand of the Revolution, was initially skeptical. He worried that the new government would swallow up the state's power and individual liberties along with it. The pro-ratification side, the Federalists, quickly realized they were facing a wall of opposition. They wouldn't win on the merits of the Constitution alone. They had to make a promise. This became the turning point. In Massachusetts, and then in other key states like Virginia and New York, a crucial compromise was struck. The Federalists, led by figures like James Madison, promised that if the states would ratify the Constitution as it was, the very first act of the new Congress would be to consider and pass a series of amendments. These amendments would serve as a Bill of Rights, explicitly protecting the fundamental freedoms that the people so deeply feared losing. This wasn't a trick. It was a solemn pledge, a gentleman's agreement that tipped the scales. The promise of a Bill of Rights was the key that unlocked ratification. It was the assurance that the new government would be born with its hands tied, legally prevented from becoming the monster the people feared. The calls that had started as fearful whispers on farms and in taverns had grown into a political demand that could not be ignored. The people had spoken, not with one voice, but with a chorus of shared anxieties, and their leaders were forced to listen. The fear of power, eat, turn it out, was just as powerful a force in shaping America as the desire for it. The Constitution would live, but it would not live without its conscience, a Bill of Rights, born from the people's healthy and hard-won fear of tyranny. Thank you so much for watching. This piece of history is a powerful reminder that our rights weren't just given, they were demanded by people who understood the price of freedom. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We love hearing from you, so leave your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the founding of the United States. Last time, we explored the creation of the Constitution, a document forged in the heat of compromise. But what if I told you that for many of America's most respected leaders, this new plan was a terrifying step towards tyranny? What if the document we now revere was in Terai's, a betrayal of the revolution itself. Today, we're diving into the powerful, passionate, and often overlooked voices of the While names like Madison and Hamilton championed the Constitution, a formidable opposition rose, arguing that it concentrated too much power in a distant, centralized government. These weren't fringe figures. They were patriots, governors, and heroes of the revolution. Their primary concern, the glaring absence of a Bill of Rights. They looked at the proposed framework and saw a government with immense power to tax, to raise armies, and to make laws, but with no explicit, written guarantees protecting the fundamental rights of the people. At the forefront of this opposition was the legendary orator Patrick Henry, the man who had famously declared, "Give me liberty, or give me death," now thundered against the Constitution and the Virginia ratifying convention. He saw the powerful presidency as dangerously close to a monarchy and the federal government's authority as a direct threat to the sovereignty of the states and the liberty of the individual. Henry's argument was visceral and powerful. He asked his fellow Virginians, who authorized them to speak the language of we, the people, instead of we, the states. For him, this wasn't just a change in wording. It was a fundamental shift in power away from the people and their local governments towards a new, potentially oppressive national entity. He feared this new government would swallow the states whole, leaving citizens at the mercy of a powerful few. Standing alongside Henry was another Virginian giant, George Mason. Mason was one of the most respected intellectuals of his time, the principal author of Virginia's own Declaration of Rights. He was a delegate at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, working tirelessly through that long, hot summer. But in the final days, he made a stunning decision. George Mason refused to sign the Constitution. Why? Because, as he put it, it had no Declaration of Rights. He believed that any government, no matter how well-intentioned, could become tyrannical if its powers were not strictly limited and the rights of its citizens were not explicitly protected. Mason warned that, without these written protections, the federal government could one day trample on freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to a trial by jury. He argued that to leave these rights to mere implication was to not secure them at all. His refusal to endorse the document he helped create sent shockwaves through the states and gave immense credibility to the Anti-Federalist cause. The Anti-Federalists weren't just concerned about what was missing. They were also alarmed by what was included. They pointed to the necessary and proper clause and the supremacy clause as blank checks for federal power. They argued that these clauses would allow the national government to pass almost any law it wished and override any state law that stood in its way. In a series of widely circulated essays, written under pseudonyms like Brutus and Cato, they laid out their case, piece by piece. They warned that a standing army in peacetime was a classic tool of oppression. They worried that the federal court system would overpower state courts, and that a distant capital would be unresponsive to the needs of ordinary farmers and merchants. Their core message was consistent. The liberties won with blood in the Revolution were too precious to be entrusted to a new, powerful, and untested government, without specific, unshakable protections. They weren't against a union, but they demanded a union that preserved, not threatened, individual liberty. These weren't just abstract philosophical debates. For many Americans, these warnings felt incredibly real. They had just fought a war against a powerful, centralized government in Great Britain that they felt had ignored their rights. The idea of creating another powerful, distant government felt like a dangerous step backward. The Anti-Federalists spoke directly to this fear. They argued that true liberty thrived in small, local republics where representatives were close to the people they served and accountable to them. A sprawling, continental empire, they believed, could only be ruled by force. They envisioned a future where a powerful federal government, disconnected from the people, would slowly erode their freedoms in the name of efficiency and order. The debate was fierce, playing out in newspapers, pamphlets, and 10 state conventions across the nation. The Federalists, with their well-organized campaign, and the influential Federalist papers, argued that the new government structure, with its checks and balances, was sufficient to prevent tyranny. They labeled the Anti-Federalists as short-sighted men who would prefer chaos to a strong, effective union. But the Anti-Federalists' persistence struck a deep chord with the American people. Their demand for a Bill of Rights was not just a negotiating tactic. It was a fundamental condition for their support. In state after state, the Constitution was ratified by the slimmest of margins. In key states like Massachusetts, Virginia, and New York, ratification only passed with the understanding that a Bill of Rights would be immediately considered and added as amendments. The Anti-Federalists may have officially lost the battle over ratification, but in a crucial sense, they won the war for our rights. Their relentless, principled opposition forced the Federalists to concede. James Madison, who had initially believed a Bill of Rights was unnecessary, recognized its political necessity and personally championed the first 10 amendments through the new Congress. So, when we look at the Bill of Rights today are freedom of speech, religion, the press, our right to bear arms, and the rights of the accused. We have the anti-Federalists. They were the ones who sounded the alarm, who warned against the temptations of unchecked power, and who refused to accept a new government without explicit, written protections for individual liberty. Patrick Henry, George Mason, and the many others who raised their voices in opposition weren't trying to sabotage the new nation. They were trying to secure its soul. Their legacy is a powerful reminder that skepticism of power is not unpatriotic, and that demanding our rights be protected is one of the most American things we can do. They ensured that the new United States would be founded not just on a framework of power, but on a foundation of liberty. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into American history. The story of the Anti-Federalists is a crucial chapter in understanding who we are as a nation. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. All right, let's talk about a man who was initially a skeptic but became a champion. I'm talking about James Madison, and this is the story of how he became the father of the Bill of Rights. When the idea of a Bill of Rights first came up, Madison wasn't exactly jumping for joy. In fact, he was pretty skeptical. He thought the Constitution, as it was written, already did a good job of limiting the government's power. He worried that trying to list out every single right was impossible. What if you missed one? Would that mean the government could trample all over it? He called this a parchment barrier. Just words on paper that a powerful government could easily ignore. He believed the structure of the new government itself, with its checks and balances, was the best protection for liberty. So, what changed his mind? Well, two things: people and politics. The ratification debates were intense. State after state was saying, "We'll sign this Constitution, but we want a Bill of Rights." This wasn't just a few loud voices. It was a powerful, nationwide movement. People like Patrick Henry and George Mason were stoking fears that the new federal government would become a tyrant without specific, written protections for individual liberties. Madison, a sharp political operator, listened. He heard the anxieties of his fellow citizens. He realized that for the new nation to be truly united, the government needed the people's trust, and a Bill of Rights was the price of that trust. Then there was the political reality. Madison wanted a seat in the very first Congress. He was running against James Monroe, who was a strong supporter of adding a Bill of Rights. The voters in their Virginia district were overwhelmingly in favor of it. Madison's close friend, Thomas Jefferson, writing to him from Paris, also urged him to support the cause. Jefferson argued that while a Bill of Rights isn't perfect, a half a loaf is better than no bread. It gives the people a legal tool to fight for their freedoms. Madison saw the writing on the wall. To win his election and, more importantly, to ensure the new Constitution was accepted by all, he had to make a promise. He publicly announced that if elected, he would personally take up the cause of a Bill of Rights in the first Congress. It was a masterful political move. He won the election, and he arrived in Congress with a mission. This is where Madison truly steps into his role as the architect. He didn't just say, "Okay, let's add some rights." He took on the monumental task of sifting through over 200 different proposed amendments sent in by the states. Imagine a flood of suggestions, from freedom of speech to the right to hunt on your own land. It was a chaotic mix of profound principles and local concerns. Madison's genius was in how he organized this chaos. He didn't just copy and paste. He synthesized. He distilled these many proposals down to their essential, universal principles. He carefully studied the Virginia Declaration of Rights, written by his friend George Mason, and other historical documents like the English Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights of 1689. He was looking for the timeless truths about human freedom. He then presented a clear, concise list of amendments to Congress. He wasn't just adding them as an afterthought at the end of the Constitution. His initial idea was to weave these rights directly into the main body of the document, right where they would limit specific government powers. For example, he wanted to put the rights of free speech and press right into Article 1, which deals with Congress. He thought this would make it crystal clear that these were fundamental limits on the government's authority. But his fellow congressmen pushed back. They didn't want to alter the original text of the Constitution that had been so painstakingly crafted and ratified. They argued it would be confusing and disrespectful to the original framers. So, a compromise was reached. The amendments would be added as a separate list at the end. This is why we have the Bill of Rights as the first 10 amendments, rather than integrated into the main text. Even then, the fight wasn't over. Some Federalists in Congress still thought it was a waste of time. They dragged their feet, hoping the whole issue would just go away. But Madison was relentless. He was a force of nature on the House floor. He argued, he persuaded, he negotiated. He reminded his colleagues of the promise they had made to the American people. He argued that this wasn't just about appeasing critics. It was about solidifying the foundation of the new republic and securing the great object of liberty. Through his tireless efforts, Madison guided a list of 17 amendments through the House. The Senate then condensed this list down to 12. These 12 were then sent to the states for ratification. It was a long and difficult process. By 1791, the states had ratified 10 of them, and those 10 amendments became what we now know and cherish as the Bill of Rights. So, the man who started as a skeptic became the indispensable champion. James Madison listened to the voice of the people, understood the political necessity, and used his incredible intellect and legislative skill to turn a vague promise into concrete, enduring law. He didn't invent these rights. They were born from centuries of struggle and thought, but he was the architect who built them into the very foundation of American government. And that's a legacy worth remembering. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this interesting, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into history. We'll see you in the next chapter. Hello and welcome back to our journey through the founding of America. Last time, we witnessed the monumental effort to forge a new constitution, a blueprint for a stronger, more unified nation. But the ink was barely dry, and the battle was far from over. Across the 13 states, a fierce debate raged. Many Americans, having just thrown off the yoke of a powerful king, looked at this new federal government with deep suspicion. Where were the protections for their hard-won liberties? This fear was the central challenge, and it's where our story today begins, with a promise made by a man who would become the architect of American freedom. James Madison. Imagine the scene. It's 1788 in Virginia, a state teeming with influential voices, many of whom were deeply skeptical of the new Constitution. Figures like Patrick Henry, the man who famously declared, "Give me liberty, or give me death," thundered against the proposed government, warning that it would become a new form of tyranny. He argued that without a specific list of rights, the federal government could slowly but surely chip away at the freedoms of the people. This wasn't just political posturing. It was a genuine fear felt by farmers, merchants, and everyday citizens who remembered the intrusive power of British rule. They worried about soldiers being quartered in their homes, their property being seized without cause, and their voices being silenced. In the midst of this firestorm stood James Madison. He had been a chief architect of the Constitution, believing that its structure of checks and balances was sufficient to protect liberty. Initially, he was wary of adding a Bill of Rights. He argued that listing specific rights might be dangerous. What if they forgot one? Would that mean the government could then infringe upon that unlisted right? He also felt that the power to violate rights simply was ungranted to the new government in the first place. But Madison was, above all, a pragmatist. He was also a listener. He traveled throughout Virginia, engaging not just with political elites, but with the common people. He listened to their anxieties in town halls, in taverns, and on courthouse steps. He heard their stories and understood the depth of their fear. These weren't abstract philosophical debates for them. They were real, tangible concerns about their lives and the future of their children. They trusted Madison. They saw in him not just a brilliant political mind, but a man of integrity, someone who genuinely cared about the principles of the revolution. It was this trust, this direct connection with the people, that led to a pivotal moment in American history. As the Virginia Ratification Convention hung in the balance, Madison realized that logic alone wouldn't win the day. He needed to bridge the gap between the Federalists who supported the Constitution and the Anti-Federalists who feared it. So, he made a promise. It was a solemn vow, a campaign pledge made directly to the people of Virginia and, by extension, to all Americans. He declared that if they would ratify the Constitution, he would make it his first priority in the new Congress to introduce a series of amendments. These amendments would not alter the structure of the government he had worked so hard to create, but they would serve as a bulwark, a clear and unmistakable barrier, protecting individual liberties from government overreach. He promised to champion what would eventually become the Bill of Rights. This wasn't a reluctant concession. It was an act of profound political leadership. Madison was building a bridge of trust. He was telling the skeptics, "I hear you. I understand your fears. Trust me, and together we will make this new government not just strong, but also safe for your freedom." This promise was the turning point. It swayed crucial votes in Virginia, one of the largest and most influential states. Its ratification created a momentum that helped carry the Constitution over the finish line. Madison had staked his reputation on this pledge, and the people had placed their faith in him. He now had to make good on his word, a task that would prove to be just as challenging as drafting the Constitution itself. He would have to navigate a skeptical Congress, where many of his fellow Federalists still thought a Bill of Rights was unnecessary, even foolish. But Madison was driven by the promise he had made, not just to the delegates in a stuffy convention hall, but to the citizens who looked to him as the guardian of their liberty. Once elected to the first Congress, Madison immediately got to work. He sifted through over 200 proposed amendments sent in by the various state ratifying conventions. He distilled these wide-ranging, sometimes contradictory demands into a concise and powerful set of principles. He drew from historic documents like the Magna Carta and Virginia's own Declaration of Rights, authored by his friend George Mason. He wasn't just cutting and pasting. He was carefully crafting each phrase to be both powerful in its meaning and precise in its legal application. He had to convince his colleagues that these amendments weren't a sign of weakness, but a fulfillment of the revolution's core ideals. Think about the pressure he was under. The new government was just finding its footing. There were departments to create, a financial system to establish, and 1,000 other urgent tasks. Many in Congress saw Madison's focus on amendments as a distraction. They urged him to move on, to deal with more practical matters. But Madison persisted. He argued passionately on the floor of the House of Representatives, reminding them of the promise made to the people. He argued that the stability and legitimacy of the new republic depended on securing the public's trust. The government, he insisted, could only succeed if the people believed it was asterisk. Their asterisk government, one that respected their fundamental rights. His tireless advocacy paid off. He skillfully steered 12 amendments through Congress. Of these, 10 would be ratified by the states and forever enshrined in our history as the Bill of Rights. These 10 amendments represent the fulfillment of Madison's promise: freedom of speech, press, and religion. The right to bear arms, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, the right to a fair trial. These weren't gifts from the government. Madison saw them as pre-existing, natural rights that the government was now forbidden from infringing upon. He had successfully woven a shield for the people into the very fabric of the nation as founding document. This act cemented the trust that Madison had so carefully built. He showed the American people that their fears were heard, their voices mattered, and that a leader's promise could be a sacred bond. The Bill of Rights transformed the Constitution from a mere framework for government into a charter of liberty. It was a testament to Madison's belief that a government of the people, by the people and for the people, must begin with a profound respect for the rights and freedoms of every single person. He proved that true strength in a republic comes not from unchecked power, but from the willing consent and trust of its citizens. His promise, and his determination to keep it, ensured that the new United States would be not just a nation of laws, but a beacon of liberty for generations to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a crucial chapter of our history. The story of Madison's promise is a powerful reminder of the importance of trust and integrity in public life. If you found this story as inspiring as I do, please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next chapter. We love hearing from you, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey through American history. Today, we're stepping into the year 1789. A critical moment when the newly formed United States was at a crossroads. The Constitution was ratified, but the air was thick with unease. A promise had been made, a promise of a Bill of Rights, and one man, James Madison, took it upon himself to fulfill it. This is the story of how that promise was kept. Imagine James Madison in the summer of 1789. The first Congress is in session, buzzing with the urgent tasks of building a government from scratch. There are departments to create, taxes to levy, and a judiciary to establish. In the midst of this whirlwind, Madison is a figure of intense focus, often seen poring over a mountain of documents. He wasn't just another congressman, he was a man on a mission. What was he studying so diligently? He had stacks of notes from the Constitutional Convention, letters from concerned citizens, and, most importantly, the more than 200 proposed amendments sent in by the state ratifying conventions. These weren't just suggestions. They were the collective voice of the American people, expressing their hopes and fears for the new republic. They were a laundry list of liberties that the people demanded be protected. Think about the sheer volume of this task. Madison had to sift through every single proposal, from Virginia's detailed Declaration of Rights to the simpler, yet equally passionate, pleas from small towns in Mass. He wasn't just reading, he was dissecting. He was looking for common threads, for the core principles that resonated across the 13 states. He saw a consistent cry for freedom of speech, for the right to a fair trial, for protection against a powerful central government overstepping its bounds. This was more than an academic exercise. For Madison, this was about the very survival of the nation. He knew that, without a Bill of Rights, the anti-federalist opposition would never be truly pacified. The Union, so fragile and new, could fracture before it even had a chance to solidify. He saw the amendments not as a concession, but as a crucial component to complete the constitutional structure he had worked so hard to build. But his task was incredibly delicate. He was walking a political tightrope. On one side, he had his fellow Federalists, many of whom were his close friends and allies. They were skeptical, to say the least. Guys like Alexander Hamilton thought a Bill of Rights was unnecessary, even dangerous. They argued that by listing specific rights, you might imply that any rights not listed weren't protected. They were also worried that reopening the debate on the Constitution could lead to chaos and unravel the whole thing. They urged Madison to be cautious, to let the new government find its footing before making any changes. On the other side was the powerful, insistent voice of the people, championed by the They had agreed to ratify the Constitution on the condition that their fundamental freedoms would be explicitly guaranteed. They weren't just asking, they were demanding. They saw the absence of a Bill of Rights as a gaping hole in the nation's founding document, a potential doorway for tyranny. They wanted strong, clear language that would leave no doubt about the limits of federal power. Madison had to find a way to bridge this divide. He had to craft amendments that would be strong enough to satisfy the demands for liberty, yet moderate enough to be accepted by the cautious Federalists in Congress. It was a monumental balancing act. He had to soothe the fears of the people without crippling the new government he believed in. So, how did he do it? He started by synthesizing. He took the hundreds of proposals and distilled them into a concise, powerful list. He wasn't just a copy. He was an architect. He refined the language, making it more precise and legally sound. For example, where a state might have vaguely demanded freedom of conscience, Madison crafted the more elegant and enduring phrase, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." He also made a strategic decision. Instead of creating a separate Bill of Rights to be tacked on at the end, his initial idea was to weave the amendments directly into the text of the original Constitution. He thought this would better integrate the rights into the very fabric of the government structure. It was a clever move, designed to show that these rights were not an afterthought, but an integral part of the constitutional framework. Throughout this process, Madison was in constant communication with key figures, most notably Thomas Jefferson, who was serving as the American minister to France. Jefferson was a passionate advocate for a Bill of Rights, and his letters from Paris provided Madison with both intellectual reinforcement and moral support. Jefferson famously wrote that a Bill of Rights is what the people are entitled to against every government on earth. This long-distance collaboration was vital, keeping Madison's resolve strong against the pushback he faced in Congress. He also had to manage the personalities within Congress. Many of his colleagues were impatient. They saw the debate over amendments as a distraction from the real work of governance, setting up the Treasury, organizing the military, and dealing with foreign policy. They would groan when Madison would, once again, take the floor to speak about his proposed amendments. They saw him as obsessed, but Madison was persistent. He knew this was a legacy moment. He argued passionately that fulfilling their promise was not a distraction, but the most important business they could conduct. He framed it as an act of good faith, a way to build public trust and ensure the long-term stability of the government. He wasn't just fighting for abstract principles. He was fighting for the heart and soul of the American experiment. Finally, on June 8, 1789, the moment arrived. James Madison stood before the House of Representatives. With his meticulous notes in hand, he formally introduced his proposals. He didn't just dump a list on their desks. He delivered a masterful speech, laying out his reasoning with clarity and conviction. He addressed the fears of his Federalist colleagues, assuring them that his amendments would not undermine the government's authority. He also spoke directly to the hopes of the Anti-Federalists, demonstrating that their calls for liberty had been heard. He presented not 10, but 19 proposed amendments. These amendments covered a wide range of rights, from the freedoms of religion, speech, and the press, to the right to bear arms, the right to a trial by jury, and protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. He even included an amendment, which ultimately didn't pass, that would have applied some of these protections to state governments as well, a concept far ahead of its time. This was the first crucial step. Getting the proposals onto the floor of Congress was a victory in itself, but Madison knew the fight was far from over. His 19 proposals were about to enter the grueling legislative process of debate, revision, and compromise. He had successfully drafted the amendments, but now he would have to shepherd them through the political gauntlet of Congress and the states. The journey to the Bill of Rights was well underway, thanks to the tireless work of one remarkably dedicated statesman. Thank you so much for watching. The story of how these 19 proposals were narrowed down to the 10 we know today is coming up next. If you're enjoying this deep dive into American history, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. We'll see you in the next video. Imagine this. The year is 1789. The ink on the new United States Constitution is barely dry. The nation has a president, a government, a framework for a new republic. But for many, a crucial piece is still missing, a guarantee of their fundamental rights. This is where our story picks up, in the halls of the First Congress in New York City, where the battle for what would become the Bill of Rights was about to begin. James Madison, once skeptical of a Bill of Rights, now found himself its chief champion. He had promised his constituents, he had promised the nation, that he would see this through. On June 8, 1789, he stood before the House of Representatives, a list of proposed amendments in hand. But the reception was chilly, to say the least. You have to understand the mood in Congress. Many representatives were exhausted. They had just been through a grueling, years-long debate over the Constitution itself. Their priority was to get the new government up and running. They had to create a judiciary, establish executive departments, figure out how to raise revenue. To them, Madison's amendments felt like a distraction, a detour from the urgent business of nation building. One congressman from Georgia, James Jackson, was particularly vocal. He argued that the states had just ratified the Constitution as it was. Why were they now trying to alter it before it even had a chance to work? He worried that reopening this debate would stir up old divisions and sow discord. Others saw the amendments as simply unnecessary. Alexander Hamilton had famously argued that the Constitution was a document of limited, enumerated powers. If the government wasn't given the power to restrict the press, why did they need an amendment saying it couldn't? To them, listing specific rights might even be dangerous, implying that any right not listed wasn't protected. But Madison and his allies saw it differently. They knew that the promise of a Bill of Rights was the very reason several key states, like Virginia and New York, had agreed to ratify the Constitution. To them, this wasn't a distraction. It was a promise to be kept. It was the essential foundation for building trust between the people and their new federal government. They argued that these weren't just words on paper. They were a bulwark against tyranny. So, the great debate began, and it wasn't just about whether to have a Bill of Rights, but what exactly it should say. Every word, every comma, was scrutinized, fought over, and revised. This is where the abstract ideals of liberty met the messy reality of lawmaking. Take the First Amendment, for example. Madison's original proposal was much longer and more detailed. It talked about the rights of conscience, the freedom of speech, and the freedom of the press. The congressmen debated its scope. Should freedom of speech be absolute? What about libel or slander? They wrestled with the wording, trying to find a balance that would protect individual expression without allowing for chaos. The phrase, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion," was the result of intense debate over the relationship between church and state. They wanted to prevent a national church like the Church of England, but they didn't necessarily want to scrub religion from public life entirely. It was a delicate and deliberate choice of words. Then there was the amendment we now know as the Second. The original text focused more on the importance of a well-regulated militia for the security of a free state. The debates in Congress reveal a focus on the collective right to bear arms for militia service, a common concern in an era without a large standing army. The wording was tweaked and tightened, eventually leading to the clause we know today, a clause whose meaning has been debated ever since. This shows how the very language chosen in 1789 would echo through centuries of American life, shaping legal battles and cultural identities. And what about the rights that didn't make the cut? Madison had proposed an amendment that would have applied some of these protections, like freedom of speech and religion, directly to the states. Can you imagine how different our history might have been if that had passed? But the House rejected it. At the time, Congress was deeply hesitant to impose restrictions on the state governments. The focus was almost entirely on limiting the power of the new federal government. This decision highlights the immense power the state still held and the prevailing fear of a centralized authority. Throughout the summer of 1789, the amendments were passed from the House to the Senate. The Senate, which met in secret, made its own changes. They combined some of Madison's proposals, refining 17 articles down to 12. For example, they consolidated the separate clauses on speech, press, assembly, and petition into the single, powerful sentence we now recognize as the First Amendment. They also cut Madison's proposed amendment on state limitations. The process was slow, painstaking, and often contentious. It was a legislative grind. But through it all, Madison persisted. He cajoled, he compromised. He reminded his colleagues of the promises they had made to the American people. He understood that this was more than just a political exercise. It was about defining the very character of the new nation. Would it be a nation where the government granted rights to the people, or one where the people possessed inherent rights that the government was bound to respect? Finally, on September 25, 1789, Congress approved 12 amendments and sent them to the states for ratification. It had been a long and arduous journey from Madison's initial proposal. The debates had been fierce, the compromises difficult, but in that process, the vague desires for liberty were hammered into concrete legal principles. The wording they chose, the arguments they had, didn't end the debate over the Constitution. They set the stage for the next 2 centuries of American legal and social history. The future of American liberty was being forged, sentence by sentence, in the heated crucible of congressional debate. Thanks so much for watching this deep dive into our nation's history. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the final chapter in our series, where these 12 articles face their ultimate test. ratification by the states. We'll see you next time.
Welcome back to our journey through the heart of American liberty. Last time, we saw James Madison championing a Bill of Rights in Congress. But how did we get from nearly 200 proposals down to the 10 amendments we cherish today? Let's dive into Chapter 9, Refining the Language of Freedom. Imagine a room filled with the sharpest legal minds of the 18th century, tasked with a monumental job to forge the bedrock of individual rights. The initial flood of proposals from the states was overwhelming. Madison had already consolidated them into 19, but even that was too many. The House of Representatives formed a select committee with Madison at the helm to further distill these ideas. This committee of 11 was a crucible of debate. They weren't just checking boxes. They were debating the very essence of freedom. Every word, every comma was scrutinized. They argued over the placement of the amendments. Should they be woven into the original Constitution or stand alone at the end? They settled on the latter, preserving the integrity of the original text while adding these crucial protections. After intense deliberation, the committee presented a revised list to the full House. More debates followed. The process was a testament to the founders' belief in thorough representative governance. They weren't rushing. They were building something to last for centuries. Finally, the House approved 17 articles and sent them over to the Senate. Now, the Senate, ever the more deliberative body, took its turn. They were even more ruthless in their editing. They combined amendments, rephrased others, and cut the list down further. For example, they merged several of Madison's proposals on religious freedom, speech, and press into the powerful, single sentence we now know as the First Amendment. This process of consolidation was key. It wasn't about losing rights, but about creating stronger, more encompassing statements of principle. The Senate's work whittled the 17 articles down to just 12. This wasn't a compromise of ideals, but a refinement of language, aiming for clarity and impact. A joint conference committee was then formed to reconcile the differences between the House and Senate versions. Think of it as the final polish. After more back and forth, they agreed on the 12 articles that would be sent to the states for ratification. It's a fascinating example of the legislative process working as intended, multiple layers of review, debate, and refinement, all to ensure the final product was as perfect as humanly possible. What began as a scattered chorus of demands from the states had been orchestrated into a powerful symphony of rights, ready to be presented to the American people. Now, let's zoom in on the specific words they chose, because the precision is breathtaking. Take the opening of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law. Why Congress? Why not the government shall make no law? This wasn't an accident. The founders were acutely aware of where the greatest threat to liberty had historically come from: the national, central legislature. Their experience with the British Parliament had taught them that a powerful legislative body could easily trample on the rights of the people. By specifically naming Congress, they were putting a direct and unambiguous chain on the federal legislative branch. This was a targeted strike against the potential for federal overreach. It established a clear boundary. The federal government, through its lawmaking body, was explicitly forbidden from entering certain spheres of an individual's life: their religion, their speech, their right to assemble. It was a masterstroke of legal drafting, creating a shield for the people against the most powerful entity they had just created. This phrase, "Congress shall make no law," acts as a fundamental check on power. It's not a suggestion, it's a command. It's a negative liberty, meaning it tells the government what it cannot do, rather than what it must do. This is a core principle of American freedom. Liberty thrives not when the government grants rights, but when its power to infringe upon them is strictly limited. The framers understood that a government powerful enough to give you everything you want is also powerful enough to take everything you have. This precise wording was a direct answer to the fears of the Anti-Federalists, who worried the new Constitution created a central government that would inevitably become tyrannical. By starting the Bill of Rights with this powerful prohibition on Congress, the framers sent a clear message. This new federal government would have limits. It was a promise that the concentration of power in a national capital would not come at the expense of fundamental human freedoms. The language was a safeguard, a firewall built with words to protect the citizen from the state. Think about the implications. It creates a hierarchy. The rights to speech, religion, and assembly are placed outside the legislative reach of Congress. They are pre-existing natural rights that the government has no authority to tamper with. This concept was revolutionary. It flipped the traditional relationship between the ruler and the ruled. Instead of people having only the rights the government allowed, the government would only have the powers the people granted, and even those powers could not touch these essential freedoms. The elegance of Congress shall make no law is that it's both simple and profound. It's a phrase any citizen can understand, yet it contains a deep well of political philosophy. It's the very DNA of limited government. Every time a law is proposed, this phrase forces us to ask a fundamental question. Does Congress have the authority to act in this area? It is the perpetual guardian at the gate of our liberties. So, from a sprawling list of state demands to 12 meticulously crafted articles, the Bill of Rights was forged in the fires of debate and compromise. The language wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate, precise construction designed to build a lasting defense against tyranny. The phrase, "Congress shall make no law," isn't just a historical artifact. It's a living principle that continues to shape the legal and political landscape of the United States to this day. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the language of freedom. It's in these details that we find the true genius of the American experiment. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next chapter, where we explore the ratification process and how these 12 proposals finally became the 10 amendments we know and revere. See you next time.
Welcome back to our series on the American story. Today, we dive into one of the most suspenseful chapters in the nation's founding, the ratification of the Bill of Rights. The stage was set, the proposals were on the table, but the final decision wasn't up to Congress. It was up to the states. This is the story of how we, the people, through their state legislatures, shaped the very soul of American liberty. After Congress approved 12 proposed amendments, the real battle began. The fate of these rights now rested in the hands of 13 distinct states, each with its own culture, economy, and set of priorities. The process was simple on paper. 3/4 of the states out of the 13 at the time had to approve an amendment for it to become part of the Constitution. But in practice, it was a political minefield. Imagine the scene. Across the country, in bustling cities and quiet towns, Americans were engaged in a great debate. Newspapers were filled with passionate arguments for and against each proposed right. In taverns, churches, and state houses, citizens and their representatives argued fiercely. What did it truly mean to have freedom of speech? How powerful should the federal government be? Which rights were absolutely essential to protect them from a repeat of British tyranny? The process started off with a bang. New Jersey was the first to act, ratifying 10 of the 12 amendments on November 20th, 1789, just a few months after Congress sent them out. Maryland and North Carolina quickly followed suit. It seemed like a smooth ride was ahead, but don't be fooled, the early agreements masked deep divisions that were about to surface. Each state looked at the amendments through its own unique lens. For some, the protection of religious freedom was paramount. For others, the right to bear arms was a non-negotiable defense against a potential standing army. And for many, the 10th Amendment, which reserves powers to the states and the people, was the most crucial of all. It was seen as the ultimate safeguard against an overreaching federal government. The real drama, however, was brewing in the two powerhouses of the young nation, Virginia and New York. These large, influential states had been hotbeds of anti-Federalist sentiment during the original Constitution debates. They had only ratified the Constitution with the understanding that a Bill of Rights would be added. Now, it was time for the Federalists to make good on their promise. In Virginia, the debate was led by two giants of American history. James Madison, now a supporter of the amendments he had once been hesitant about, championed their cause. But he faced fierce opposition from prominent anti-Federalists like Patrick Henry. Henry argued that the proposed amendments weren't strong enough. He wanted more explicit, more powerful restrictions on federal power. The debates in the Virginia House of Delegates were electric, a true clash of titans over the future of American freedom. The entire nation watched, holding its breath. Virginia's decision could make or break the entire effort. Meanwhile, New York was its own battleground. Having been a center of the Federalist Papers debate, New York was deeply divided. The state's leaders were skeptical and demanded robust protections for individual liberties. They had been one of the last and most reluctant states to ratify the original Constitution, and their support for the amendments was far from guaranteed. The tension was palpable, with these critical states, which had pushed so hard for a Bill of Rights in the first place, now reject the very thing they had demanded. As 1789 turned into 1790, the momentum seemed to slow. While states like New Hampshire and Delaware joined the yes column, the required number of 10 ratifying states was still out of reach. The initial burst of enthusiasm had given way to a tense, uncertain waiting game. The fate of the amendments hung precariously in the balance. It was entirely possible that the whole project could fail, leaving the new Constitution without its promised safeguards and the nation deeply fractured. This wasn't just a political squabble. It was a crisis of trust. The American people had placed their faith in a new form of government on the condition that their fundamental rights would be protected. If the states failed to agree, it could undermine the very legitimacy of the young republic. Questions swirled. Had the promise been a hollow one? Could the 13 states, so different in their views, ever truly unite under a single set of principles? The turning point finally came as the debates in Virginia reached their climax. After months of intense negotiation and political maneuvering, the Virginia legislature, on December 15, 1791, voted to approve the amendments. With Virginia's ratification, the magic number was reached. 10 states had now officially approved what we now know as the Bill of Rights. The news spread across the country, carried by horse and by ship. A wave of relief washed over the nation. The promise had been kept. The great compromise that had secured the Constitution was now complete. The amendments concerning the number of representatives and congressional pay were not ratified at the time, but the 10 that were protecting speech, religion, the press, and the rights of the accused became the bedrock of American liberty. Even after Virginia's deciding vote, it's interesting to note that 3 states, Georgia and Connecticut, hadn't yet ratified. They weren't necessarily opposed. The process just got caught up in their own legislative calendars and political debates. In a wonderful historical footnote, they all symbolically ratified the Bill of Rights in 1939 to mark its 150th anniversary, a testament to how these principles have become a unifying force for all Americans. The story of the states' ratification is a powerful reminder that the United States was, and still is, an ongoing experiment. It shows us that unity is not always easy and that progress often comes through disagreement and debate. The fierce arguments in places like Virginia and New York weren't a sign of weakness, but of a deep and passionate engagement with the meaning of freedom. It was in these tense moments that the Bill of Rights was forged, not just as a legal document, but as a covenant between a government and its people. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through one of America's most defining moments. The story doesn't end here, of course. The interpretation and application of these rights have continued to evolve for over 2 centuries. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. The air in Richmond, Virginia, crackles with anticipation. It's December 15th, 1791. 4 months. A grand debate has swept across the fledgling United States. 12 proposed amendments to the new Constitution have been sent to the states, each a potential pillar for the rights of its citizens. The nation holds its breath. 9 states have already given their approval, but the magic number 4 ratification is 10. The fate of these fundamental freedoms now rests squarely on the shoulders of the Virginia General Assembly. Imagine the scene. Delegates in powdered wigs and wool coats, their faces etched with the gravity of the moment. Outside, news travels slowly, by horseback and by ship. Every citizen, from the farmers in the Shenandoah Valley to the merchants in Philadelphia, is waiting. This isn't just about laws on paper. It's about the very soul of their new republic. It's a promise waiting to be fulfilled. A promise of liberty. A promise that the power of the government would have its limits, and the rights of the people would be forever enshrined. The question, hanging in the cold December air, is simple, yet monumental. Will Virginia say yes? Inside the Assembly Hall, arguments that have been honed over years are presented one last time. Voices rise and fall, echoing the passionate debates between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Men like James Madison, who once questioned the necessity of a Bill of Rights, have become its fiercest champions, understanding that it is the key to national unity. They argue that these amendments are not a sign of weakness, but a declaration of strength, a testament to a government confident enough to define its own boundaries and protect the freedoms of its people. The clerk calls for the vote. One by one, the delegates cast their ballots. You can almost hear the quills scratching on parchment. Each mark a small but powerful endorsement of liberty. The tension is unbearable. Finally, the tally is complete. The presiding officer rises. A hush falling over the chamber. He announces the result. Virginia has voted to ratify. Not just 1 or 2, but 10 of the proposed 12 amendments have met the threshold. The chamber erupts. A wave of relief and triumph washes over the delegates. Handshakes are exchanged. Backs are slapped. The long, arduous journey is over. At that very moment, history is made. The Bill of Rights is no longer a proposal, a hopeful dream, or a topic of debate. It is now the law of the land, officially and irrevocably woven into the fabric of the United States Constitution. The news spreads like wildfire from Richmond. Church bells begin to peal, their joyous ringing cascading across the city and out into the countryside. In taverns and town squares, citizens raise their glasses. Strangers congratulate one another on the street. It's a moment of profound, shared victory. This wasn't just a political achievement. It was a deep emotional release for a nation that had endured revolution and the uncertainty of self. The ratification brought an incredible sense of unity. The deep divisions between those who supported a strong central government and those who feared its potential. Tyranny began to heal. The Bill of Rights was the common ground, the compromise that finally brought everyone together under one flag, with one shared set of principles. It was a promise kept. Think about what those first 10 amendments guaranteed. Freedom of speech, of the press, of religion, the right to assemble peaceably, the right to bear arms, protections against unreasonable searches and seizures, the right to a fair and speedy trial. These weren't abstract legal concepts. They were tangible assurances that the sacrifices of the revolution had not been in vain. They were a shield for the common person against the potential overreach of power. For the first time, a government was founded not just on what it could do, but on what it could not do. To its citizens, the celebrations that followed were not just for a legal document, but for the idea of America itself. It was a celebration of a government of the people, for the people, where individual liberty was not a gift from the state, but an inherent, God-given right. The relief was palpable. The years of argument and anxiety gave way to a shared sense of accomplishment and a renewed optimism for the future. The nation, still so young and fragile, now stood on a much firmer foundation. It is important to remember what happened to the 2 amendments that were ratified that day. One concerned the apportionment of representatives in the House, and the other dealt with congressional pay. The one about pay, interestingly, would lie dormant for over 200 years, before finally being ratified in 1992 as the 27th Amendment. It just goes to show how enduring these founding documents truly are. But on that day, December 15th, 1791, the focus was entirely on the 10 that made it. This day marks the culmination of a promise made during the Constitution's drafting. Many states had only agreed to ratify the original Constitution on the condition that a Bill of Rights would be added soon after. December 15th was the day that promise was honored. It solidified the trust between the people and their new government, creating a bond that was essential for the nation's survival. The Bill of Rights became the enduring legacy of the founding generation's struggle, a beacon of freedom that would inspire not only Americans, but people all over the world. So as we look back from our modern world, let's appreciate the weight of that moment. The ratification of the Bill of Rights was not an inevitable outcome. It was the result of fierce debate, principled compromise, and a deep-seated belief in the importance of individual liberty. It was the final, critical piece that completed the puzzle of American democracy, ensuring that the new nation would be a republic of laws and, most importantly, a bastion of rights. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to a pivotal day in history. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey through American history and governance. Today, we're diving into a cornerstone of American liberty. The first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, famously known as the Bill of Rights. These amendments were added to the Constitution to protect individual freedoms and limit the power of the federal government. They represent a promise to the people, ensuring that the new government would not trample upon their fundamental rights. So, let's explore these 10 crucial protections, one by one, to understand what they mean and why they are so vital to this very day. Let's begin with the First Amendment, perhaps the most well-known. It's a powerhouse of personal freedoms, containing 5 distinct rights. First, freedom of religion. This gives every citizen the right to practice any religion they choose, or no religion at all, without government interference. It establishes a separation between church and state. Second, freedom of speech. This protects our right to express our opinions and ideas, even if they are unpopular, without fear of government censorship or punishment. Third, freedom of the press. which ensures that journalists and media outlets can report news and critique the government without fear of reprisal. Fourth is the right to peaceably assemble, allowing people to gather in groups for protests, parades, or meetings. And finally, the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. This means we can formally ask the government to fix a problem or change a law. Together, these 5 freedoms form the bedrock of an open and democratic society. Next up is the Second Amendment. This one is often at the center of national debate. It states, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Historically, this was rooted in the idea that citizens should be able to form militias to protect themselves and their state, as was common during the Revolutionary War era. Over time, the interpretation has evolved. The Supreme Court has affirmed that it protects an individual's right to own firearms for traditionally lawful purposes, such as self-defense within the home. However, it also acknowledges that this right is not unlimited and can be subject to regulation. The ongoing discussion about the scope and limits of the Second Amendment highlights how the Constitution is a living document, constantly being interpreted in the context of modern society. Moving on to the Third Amendment. While it doesn't make headlines today, it was incredibly important to the founding generation. It prohibits the government from forcing homeowners to quarter or house soldiers in their private homes without their consent during peacetime. In times of war, it can only be done according to law. Why was this so important? Well, before the Revolution, American colonists were often forced by the British Crown to house and feed soldiers against their will. This was seen as a major intrusion on their privacy and property rights. The Third Amendment was a direct response to that grievance, establishing a fundamental right to privacy and security within one's own home. It reinforces the principle that a person's home is their castle, a sanctuary protected from government intrusion. Now, let's look at the Fourth Amendment. This is a crucial protection for your privacy. It protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. This means that law enforcement officials can't just search you, your home, or your belongings whenever they want. Generally, they need a warrant to conduct a search. And to get a warrant, they must have probable cause, a reasonable belief based on evidence that a crime has been committed, and that the search will uncover evidence of that crime. The warrant must also be specific, describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This amendment acts as a critical check on the power of law enforcement, balancing the need to investigate crime with the individual's right to be secure in their person and property. It's a cornerstone of our right to privacy. The next 4 amendments, 5 through 8, deal with the rights of individuals who are accused of a crime. They ensure fairness in the legal process. Let's start with the Fifth Amendment. It's famous for the phrase, pleading the fifth, which is the right against self-incrimination, meaning you cannot be forced to testify against yourself in a criminal case. The Fifth Amendment also guarantees the right to a grand jury for serious federal crimes, protects against double jeopardy being tried for the same crime twice, and ensures due process of law. This means the government must follow fair and established legal procedures. Finally, it requires the government to provide just compensation if it takes private property for public use, a principle known as eminent domain. Next, the Sixth Amendment continues to define the rights of the accused. It guarantees the right to a speedy and public trial. This prevents the government from holding someone in jail indefinitely without a trial and ensures that the trial is open to the public, promoting transparency. It also gives the accused the right to an impartial jury of their peers. Furthermore, it ensures the right to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to confront the witnesses against them, to compel favorable witnesses to testify, and, critically, the right to have the assistance of counsel for their defense. This right to an attorney is fundamental to ensuring a fair trial, as navigating the legal system is incredibly complex. Following that is the Seventh Amendment, which deals with civil casus disputes between individuals or organizations, usually over money or property. It guarantees the right to a jury trial in certain civil cases. At the time it was written, this applied to suits where the value in controversy exceeded $20. While that amount seems tiny today, the principle remains. In significant civil disputes, at the federal level. Citizens have the right to have their case decided by a jury of their peers, rather than solely by a judge. This preserves a role for the common citizen in the justice system, even outside of criminal law, ensuring that legal decisions reflect community values. The Eighth Amendment addresses what happens after a conviction or while awaiting trial. It prohibits excessive bail and fines and forbids cruel and unusual punishments. The ban on excessive bail ensures that a person is kept in jail before trial simply because they can afford an unreasonably high amount. The prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment is a key protection against barbaric or disproportionate penalties. What is considered cruel and unusual has been a subject of ongoing debate and legal interpretation, particularly in discussions surrounding capital punishment and prison conditions. This amendment reflects a societal commitment to treating all individuals, even those convicted of crimes, with a basic level of human dignity. Finally, we arrive at the Ninth and 10th Amendments. These two amendments serve as important bookends to the Bill of Rights, addressing the scope of the rights and powers outlined. The Ninth Amendment is a clarification. It states that just because certain rights are listed in the Constitution, it doesn't mean that these are the only asterisk rights people have. It acknowledges that people have other fundamental rights that are not explicitly mentioned in the text. This amendment protects our unenumerated rights, such as the right to privacy, which the Supreme Court has found to be implied by the Constitution. It is a powerful statement that the rights of the people are vast and not limited to what is written on paper. And that brings us to the 10th Amendment. This amendment deals with the balance of power between the federal government and the states. It's very straightforward. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. In simple terms, if the Constitution doesn't specifically give a power to the federal government, and doesn't forbid the states from having it, then that power belongs to the states, or to the people themselves. This principle is known as federalism. It was designed to prevent the central government from becoming too powerful and to preserve the authority of state governments to address local issues. It ensures a dual system of governance that remains a defining feature of the American political landscape. And there you have it, the Bill of Rights. From the fundamental freedoms of the First Amendment to the principles of federalism in the 10th, these 10 amendments form a powerful charter of liberty. They were born from a deep-seated desire to protect individual rights from government overreach, and they continue to shape legal and social debates in the United States today. Understanding them is key to understanding the rights and responsibilities that come with being a citizen. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Bill of Rights. I hope this breakdown was clear and helpful. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'll see you in the next video. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the foundations of American law. Today, we're tackling a big one. Chapter 13, Protecting Liberty in Law. This isn't just about old documents and dusty courtrooms. It's about the very air we breathe as citizens, the promises that define our relationship with power. So, how did a handful of amendments, penned over 2 centuries ago, become the moral backbone of American justice? It's a fascinating story. After the Constitution was drafted, many felt something crucial was missing. They worried the new federal government might become too powerful, just like the monarchy they had fought to escape. They wanted clear, undeniable lines drawn in the sand, protecting individual freedoms from government overreach. This public demand gave birth to the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. These weren't just afterthoughts. They were the heart of the deal. Think about it. Freedom of speech, the right to a fair trial, protection from unreasonable searches. These ideas weren't entirely new, but enshrining them at the core of the nation's legal framework was revolutionary. They became the moral compass for our entire justice system. Every law passed, every court case argued, and every police action taken is, in theory, measured against this standard. When we talk about justice in America, we're talking about a system built on the premise that individual liberty is sacred and must be actively protected. It's the standard we strive for, the ideal that guides judges, lawyers, and lawmakers. This brings us to a powerful concept: viewing the Bill of Rights as a living promise. What does that mean? It means these rights aren't just historical artifacts preserved in a museum. They are an active, ongoing covenantal dynamic agreement between the government and the governed. It's a promise from the government to respect our fundamental freedoms, and a promise from us, the people, to hold the government accountable to that commitment. This promise isn't static. It has to be reinterpreted and reapplied with each new generation and every new challenge. Think about how the right to free speech, written in an age of printing presses, applies today in the age of the internet and social media. Or how the Fourth Amendment, as protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, confronts modern technology like digital surveillance and location tracking. The core principles remain the same, but their application has to evolve. This is why we see so many landmark Supreme Court cases that hinge on interpreting the Bill of Rights. These cases aren't just legal arguments. They are society grappling with the meaning of liberty in a changing world. Each decision breathes new life into that original promise, expanding or refining our understanding of what it means to be free. The promise lives because we, the people, through our courts and our public discourse, keep it alive. It requires constant vigilance, active participation, and a willingness to stand up and say, "This promise matters." Consider the right to due process, guaranteed by the 5th and 14th Amendments. This is the promise that the government must follow fair procedures and respect all of your legal rights before it can deprive you of life, liberty, or property. This single principle is the bedrock of our criminal justice system. It ensures you have the right to an attorney, the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury, and the right to confront your accusers. Without this living promise, the scales of justice would be hopelessly tipped in favor of the state. Every time a defendant is read their Miranda rights, that's the promise in action. Every time a law is struck down for being unconstitutionally vague, that's the promise being upheld. It's a constant negotiation, a push and pull that defines the boundaries of government power. This moral backbone isn't rigid, it's flexible and strong, designed to support the structure of liberty through centuries of change. The beauty of this system is that it acknowledges that the government is imperfect and that power can corrupt. The Bill of Rights was an act of profound humility and foresight. The founders essentially said, "We've created this powerful government, but we must also create powerful shields to protect the people from it." These shields, these rights form the moral identity of our nation's legal system. They declare that the dignity and autonomy of the individual are paramount. So, as we move forward, remember that protecting liberty and law isn't a spectator sport. It's a collective responsibility. It's about understanding our rights, demanding they be respected, and participating in the conversations that shape their meaning for the future. The Bill of Rights is not just a document. It's our shared inheritance and our ongoing project. It's the living promise that we must all work to keep. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration today. I hope it gave you a new perspective on the legal foundations of our freedoms. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And do you forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We love hearing from you, so please drop your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into American history. Today, we're retackling a really juicy topic. The first major stress test of the brand new Bill of Rights. Imagine this, it's 1798. The United States is a young, fragile nation, less than a decade old under its Constitution. The ink on the Bill of Rights is barely dry. And then, Congress passes a series of laws that seem to fly directly in the face of everything those rights stood for. I'm talking about the Alien and Sedition Acts. So, what was going on? The political climate was incredibly tense. The French Revolution had devolved into chaos, and war was raging in Europe. Ere at two political parties, the Federalists, led by President John Adams, and the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, were at each other's throats. The Federalists were deeply suspicious of France and its radical ideas, while the Jeffersonians were more sympathetic. This wasn't just a friendly disagreement. It was a bitter, existential struggle over the future of the country. Amid this paranoia, the Federalist-controlled Congress passed 4 laws. 3 were aimed at immigrants, or aliens. The Naturalization Act increased the residency requirement for citizenship from 5 to 14 years, deliberately targeting Irish and French immigrants who tended to vote for the Democratic Republic. The Alien Friends Act and Alien Enemies Act gave the president the power to deport or imprison any non-citizen deemed dangerous to the United States without a trial. Think about that for a second. The power to just remove someone you don't like with no due process. This directly challenged the principles of justice and fairness laid out in the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. But the most explosive of these laws, the one that really lit the fuse, was the Sedition Act. This law made it a crime to write, print, utter, or publish ... any false, scandalous, and malicious writing against the government, Congress, or the president. The stated goal was to protect national security during a time of potential war with France. But in practice, it became a political weapon. It wasn't about stopping foreign spies. It was about silencing domestic opposition. So, what did this look like on the ground? It was an all-out assault on free speech. Newspaper editors, writers, and even a sitting congressman who criticized President Adams's administration were arrested, prosecuted, and jailed. One of the most famous cases was that of Matthew Lyon, a Vermont congressman and fierce critic of the Federalists. He published a letter accusing President Adams of having an unbounded thirst for ridiculous pomp, foolish adulation, and selfish avarice. For that, he was indicted, tried, fined $1,000, a massive sum back then, and sentenced to 4 months in jail. And here's the wild part. He actually won his re-election campaign from his jail cell. The public outcry was immense. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, horrified by what they saw as a blatant violation of the First Amendment, secretly drafted the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. These resolutions argued that the Alien and Sedition Acts were unconstitutional. They introduced a powerful and controversial idea called nullification, the theory that states had the right to declare federal laws null and void if they believed those laws violated the Constitution. This planted the seeds for future conflicts over states' rights, which would eventually culminate in the Civil War. So, how did this all end? The Alien and Sedition Acts were deeply unpopular. They were a key factor in John Adams losing the presidency to Thomas Jefferson in the election of 1800, which is sometimes called the Revolution of 1800. It was a peaceful transfer of power from one party to another, proving the system could work even under extreme stress. When Jefferson became president, he pardoned everyone convicted under the Sedition Act, and Congress eventually repaid the fines. The laws themselves were allowed to expire or were repealed. But the legacy of this early test is profound. It didn't destroy the Bill of Rights. In fact, you could argue it ultimately strengthened it. The backlash against the acts solidified the importance of freedom of speech and the press. In the American mind, it established the idea that criticizing the government isn't just a right. It's a vital part of a healthy democracy. It forced Americans to grapple with a question we still debate today. Where is the line between protecting national security and protecting individual liberties? This episode showed that having rights written on paper isn't enough. They have to be defended, fought for, and cherished by the people. The Alien and Sedition Acts were a stark warning that even in a democracy, freedoms can be threatened, especially in times of fear and political division. The courts of the time did not step in to strike down the laws the Supreme Court had yet established its power of judicial review. That would come a few years later with Marbury v. Madison. Instead, the ultimate check on this overreach of power came from the voters themselves, who threw the Federalists out of office. It was a powerful lesson in the power of public opinion and the ballot box. This story from over 220 years ago feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? We constantly see debates about the limits of speech, the rights of immigrants, and the balance between security and freedom. The Alien and Sedition Acts serve as a crucial historical reminder that the principles of the Bill of Rights are not self-enforcing. They require constant vigilance from all of us. This wasn't the last time these rights would be tested, far from it, but it was the first. And it set the stage for centuries of debate and struggle over what it truly means to be free in America. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into a critical moment in American history. I hope it gave you some food for thought. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what you think were the Federalists justified, or was this a pure power grab? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the foundations of American law. Today, we're tackling a massive topic: the Bill of Rights and the ultimate referee in the game of freedom, the Supreme Court. We all know the first 10 amendments, right? Freedom of speech, religion, the press. But have you ever stopped to think about what those words actually mean, in practice? It's not as simple as you might think. The Bill of Rights lays out our fundamental freedoms, but it does so in broad strokes. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Okay, but what counts as speech? Does it protect you if you yell fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire? Can you say anything you want? Anywhere, anytime. These are the kinds of questions that land in front of the 9 justices of the Supreme Court. Their job isn't to create new rights, but to interpret what the founders intended and apply those centuries-old principles to our modern world. Think of the Constitution as the rule book, and the Supreme Court is the panel of judges who make the final call on how the rules apply to a specific play on the field. This process is called judicial review, and it's incredibly powerful. Through their decisions, the court shapes the real-world boundaries of our liberties. Let's start with one of the big ones: the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech. This is probably the most debated and litigated right we have. The classic case everyone learns about is Schenck v. United States from 1919. This is where the famous clear and present danger tastes came from. Charles Schenck was arrested for distributing leaflets, urging men to resist the draft during World War I. The court said that in times of war, speech that could create a clear and present danger to the nation's safety wasn't protected. This established a major principle. Your rights are not absolute. They can be limited when they pose a direct threat to public safety or national security. But the definition of clear and present danger has evolved. Fast forward to 1969 in the case of Brandenburg v. Ohio. A Ku Klux Klan leader was arrested under a state law for advocating violence. This time, the Supreme Court set a much higher bar. They said the government can only restrict speech if it's directed at inciting imminent lawless action, and is likely to produce such action. Simply advocating for something in the abstract isn't enough. This was a huge win for free speech, protecting even speech that most of us would find repulsive. Because the principle is that the best way to combat bad ideas is with better ideas, not censorship. The court has also had to grapple with what even constitutes speech. Is burning a flag a form of speech? In Texas v. Johnson, 1989. The court said yes. They ruled that flag burning is a form of symbolic speech protected by the First Amendment. It's an action intended to convey a political message. This decision was controversial, but it affirmed that protection for speech isn't just about the words you say. It's about the ideas you express. From students wearing black armbands to protest a war in Tinker v. Des Moines two corporations spending money on political ads in Citizens United the court has continually expanded the definition of what speech means. Now let's switch gears to another pillar of the First Amendment: freedom of religion. This is actually a two-part deal. The Establishment Clause says the government can't establish an official religion, and the Free Exercise Clause says you're free to practice your own religion. It creates what Thomas Jefferson famously called a wall of separation between church and state. But how high should that wall be? The Supreme Court has weighed in on this countless times. Take prayer in public schools. In Engel 5 Ambitale, 1962. The court ruled that requiring students to recite a state-composed prayer was unconstitutional, even if it was non-denominational and voluntary. They argued that in a school setting, there's an inherent pressure to conform, and the government has no business composing official prayers for anyone to recite. This was a landmark decision that really fortified that wall of separation. But what about your right to practice, your religion? In Wisconsin v. Odor, 1972. The court ruled that Amish parents could pull their children out of school after the 8th grade. Despite a state law requiring school attendance until age 16, the court found that the Amish community's deeply held religious beliefs and way of life would be gravely endangered by exposure to a high school environment, and the state's interest in education wasn't compelling enough to override their religious freedom. This case shows how the court balances individual religious practice against government regulations. These two clauses often seem to be in tension. If a city puts up a holiday display with a nativity scene, is that establishing a religion, or is telling them to take it down, infringing on the free exercise of Christians in the community? The court has developed tests, like the lemon test, to try and figure this out, asking if a government action has a secular purpose, if it primarily promotes or inhibits religion, and if it creates an excessive entanglement with religion. As you can imagine, the answers are rarely simple. Finally, let's talk about a right that isn't explicitly written in the Bill of Rights, but has become one of the most significant legal concepts of our time: the right to privacy. Where did this come from? The Supreme Court pieced it together from what they called penumbras, or shadows, cast by other amendments. The First Amendment's freedom of association, the Third Amendment's prohibition against quartering soldiers, and the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches all imply that our personal lives should be free from government intrusion. The landmark case here is Griswold v. Connecticut from 1965. A Connecticut law banned the use of contraceptives. The court struck down the law, arguing that there is a zone of privacy created by several fundamental constitutional guarantees. They specifically pointed to the sanctity of the marital relationship, saying the government had no business policing the bedrooms of married couples. This idea of a constitutional right to privacy became the foundation for one of the most famous and contentious cases in Supreme Court history, Roe v. Wade in 1973. The court extended the right to privacy to include a woman's decision to terminate a pregnancy. That decision, as we all know, was a major flashpoint in American culture and politics for 50 years, until it was overturned in 2022 by the decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization The Dobbs decision stated that the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion, returning the authority to regulate it to the states. This reversal highlights the most crucial aspect of the Supreme Court's role. It's not static. The court changes as its members change. The interpretation of the Constitution can, and does, evolve over time. Cases that were once considered settled law can be revisited and overturned by a later court with a different judicial philosophy. The meaning of our freedom of speech, religion, privacy, and more is part of an ongoing conversation, a dynamic process of interpretation that has been unfolding for over 200 years. The words of the Bill of Rights are the same, but their application in our lives is constantly being debated, defined, and redefined by the Supreme Court. So, as you can see, the Bill of Rights isn't just a historical document. It's a living text that the Supreme Court brings to life, for better or worse, in every decision it makes. Understanding these key cases helps us understand the true shape and scope of the freedoms we often take for granted. Thanks so much for sticking with me through this complex topic. If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into law, history, and government. Let me know in the comments which Supreme Court case you find most fascinating. See you in the next video. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're re-diving into one of the most powerful and dynamic stories in American history: how the meaning of rights has expanded over time. When the Bill of Rights was first written, the phrase, "we the people," didn't exactly include everyone. It was a promise, a blueprint, but a very limited one. The initial vision of rights largely applied to a specific group: white, property-owning men. But the genius of those words, the very idea of inalienable rights, held a power far greater than its authors might have imagined. It planted a seed. This seed of liberty would become the rallying cry for generations to come. It wasn't just a historical document to be memorized. It became a tool, a weapon, a source of inspiration for everyone who was left out of that initial promise. Think about it. How did the fight for equality for so many different groups begin? It began by pointing to the nation's own founding documents and asking a simple, yet revolutionary question. What about us? Let's talk about the women's suffrage movement. For decades, courageous women like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and countless others organized and protested. What was their core argument? They argued that the principles of liberty and equality enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution must apply to them too. They weren't asking for special treatment. They were demanding the basic right of citizenship promised in the nation's own creed, the right to vote, to have a voice in their own governance. They took the language of the founders and held it up like a mirror to the nation, exposing the hypocrisy of a democracy that excluded half its population. The fight was long and arduous, but their foundation was unshakable because it was built on the very ideals the country claimed to cherish. Simultaneously, and for much longer, African Americans were engaged in a profound struggle for freedom and civil rights. From the abolitionist movement to the Jim Crow era and beyond, the fight was always framed in the language of rights. Frederick Douglass, in his powerful speeches, masterfully used the founders' own words to condemn the institution of slavery. He asked how a nation conceived in liberty could perpetuate such a brutal system of bondage. He and others saw the inherent contradiction and refused to let the nation forget it. They were claiming their birthright as human beings, demanding that the protections of the Bill of Rights, due process, equal protection, freedom of speech be applied to them without exception. This struggle reached a new level of intensity during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't invent a new philosophy. Instead, they brilliantly and nonviolently demanded that America live up to its own promises. Dr. King often spoke of cashing a promissory note, to which every American was an heir. That note was the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Marches, the Sit-ins. The voter registration drive Zolowitz was a powerful demand for the rights guaranteed in the 14th and 15th Amendments, rights that had been systematically denied for nearly a century. The Bill of Rights wasn't just an abstract legal concept. It was the moral and legal foundation of their entire movement. It provided the framework to challenge unjust laws and demand equal treatment under the law. And this story of expansion doesn't stop there. The same pattern holds true for so many other groups who have fought for their place in the American tapestry. LGBTQ+ activists, fighting for the right to marry and live without discrimination, have based their legal challenges on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Advocates for people with disabilities fought for the Americans with Disabilities Act, arguing for their right to equal access and opportunity in public life. Immigrant communities, Native Americans, and other minority groups have all invoked these foundational principles in their own quests for justice and equality. Each of these movements, in its own unique way, has pushed the nation to broaden its understanding of who is included in we the people. They have challenged narrow interpretations and forced the legal system in society at large to confront the gap between our ideals and our reality. It's a process of constant reinterpretation and expansion. The Bill of Rights, in this sense, is not a static document set in stone. It's a living, breathing text whose meaning has been forged and reforged in the fires of these struggles. What this incredible history teaches us is that progress is not inevitable. It is 1. It is fought for by ordinary people who dare to believe in the nation's highest ideals and demand that they be made real for everyone. They took the foundational promise of rights and, through their courage, their sacrifice, and their unwavering persistence, expanded its meaning to encompass more and more of humanity. They held the nation accountable to its own principles. So, when we look at the Bill of Rights today, we shouldn't just see it as a list of rules written over 200 years ago. We should see it as a testament to the enduring power of an idea. It is a foundation upon which generations have built their hopes and dreams for a more just and equal society. The story of American rights is the story of its expansion, a continuous journey to make the promise of liberty and justice for all a reality. And that journey, driven by the courage of those who demanded their rights, continues to this very day. Thanks so much for watching and thinking through this important history with me. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up, and do you want to forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next chapter. We'd love to have you as part of our community. See you in the next video. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into something that affects every single one of us, every single day. Whether we realize it or not, The Bill of Rights. Now, I know what you might be thinking, isn't that some old, dusty document from the 1700s? Well, yes and no. It was written in 1791, but the principles it lays out are more relevant today than ever before, especially in our super-connected, digital world. We're going to explore how these centuries-old rights are shaping our modern lives, from what we post online to how we protect our privacy. So, buckle up as we journey from quill pens and parchment to smartphones and social media. This is Chapter 17. The Bill of Rights in Modern America. Let's start with the big one. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. Back in the day, this meant you could print a pamphlet criticizing the government or gather in the town square to protest without being thrown in jail. It was revolutionary. But what does freedom of speech look like in the 21st century? Think about it. It's your latest tweet, that TikTok video you just posted, the blog you write, or the comment you left on a news article. The internet is our modern town square, a global one, where billions of us gather to share ideas, debate, and express ourselves. This digital free-for-all raises some massive questions. When you post something online, are you completely protected by the First Amendment? It's complicated. The First Amendment traditionally protects you from government censorship. It prevents the government from telling you what you can and cannot say. However, it doesn't necessarily apply to private companies. Platforms like YouTube, X, and Facebook are private entities. They have their own terms of service, which act as the rules of their digital spaces. This is why a platform can take down your content or suspend your account for violating their community guidelines, even if what you said isn't technically illegal. It's a huge, ongoing debate. Where does a platform's right to moderate its content end, and a user's freedom of expression begin? We see this clash play out all the time. Debates over cancel culture, misinformation, and hate speech are fundamentally questions about the limits of free expression in the digital age. How do we balance protecting speech with preventing harm? How do we foster open debate without allowing harmful falsehoods to spread like wildfire? The Founding Fathers couldn't have imagined a world where a single message could reach millions in an instant. But the core principle they established, that a free society depends on the free exchange of ideas, is the very principle we're wrestling with today. It shows just how enduring these foundational ideas are. Now let's shift gears to another right that's been completely reshaped by technology. The Fourth Amendment. This is the one that protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures. In 1791, this was about preventing government agents from barging into your home and rummaging through your belongings without a warrant. Your home was your castle, your private sphere. But today, where is our most private information stored? It's not in a locked desk drawer. It's on our phones, our laptops, in the cloud. Our entire lives, our conversations, our photos, our location history, our financial records are digital. So, what does unreasonable search and seizure mean when your personal papers and effects are just bits of data on a server? This question is at the heart of modern privacy debates. Can law enforcement get your emails without a warrant? Can they track your movements using your phones, GPS data? The Supreme Court has had to weigh in on these issues repeatedly. In a landmark case, they ruled that police generally need a warrant to search the contents of your cell phone, recognizing that a phone contains the privacies of life. They've also put limits on using cell tower data to track people's long-term movements. These rulings show the courts trying to apply the spirit of the Fourth Amendment to technology the founders never could have dreamed of. They're essentially saying that your digital life deserves the same level of privacy protection as your physical home. But it's not just about the government. What about corporations? Every time you use a free app, search for something online, or use a smart home device, you're generating vast amounts of data. Companies collect this data to understand our habits, sell us products, and, in many cases, sell that data to others. This raises a new kind of privacy concern. The Bill of Rights was designed to protect us from an overreaching government, not from corporate surveillance. So, who protects our privacy in the digital marketplace? This is where new laws, like data privacy regulations, are stepping in, trying to give us more control over our personal information. It's a new frontier of rights, inspired by the old principles of the Fourth Amendment. Let's also touch on the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. This is, without a doubt, one of the most debated amendments. Originally written in the context of state militias, its interpretation has evolved dramatically. Modern debates aren't about muskets for militia anymore. They're about the types of firearms available to civilians, background checks, and red flag laws. It's a powerful example of how we, as a society, continuously reinterpret the Bill of Rights to fit the realities of the present day. The core text hasn't changed, but our understanding and application of it are in constant conversation with our modern world. And what about the Fifth and Sixth Amendments? Your right to remain silent, your right to a lawyer, and your right to a fair and speedy trial. These are the bedrock of our justice system. Think about the classic line from TV shows, "You have the right to remain silent." That comes directly from the Fifth Amendment. In the digital age, this has new implications. Can your biometric data like your fingerprint or face scan used to unlock your phone be considered testimony? Can you be forced to unlock your device for law enforcement? Courts are actively debating these questions, trying to figure out how these fundamental protections against self-incrimination apply when the key to our private lives is our own body or a password stored in our memory. So, as you can see, the Bill of Rights is not a historical relic. It is a living, breathing document that we interact with every day. It's in the arguments we have online, the privacy settings we choose on our apps, and the legal battles that define the boundaries between our individual freedoms and collective security. The genius of the Bill of Rights is that it was written in broad principles, not narrow rules. It gives us the framework, but it is up to each generation to interpret and apply that framework to the challenges of their time. Our challenge is a digital one, and we are right in the middle of figuring it all out. The debates we have today about online speech, digital privacy, and the role of technology in our lives are the modern-day equivalents of the debates the founders had in Philadelphia. We're continuing their work. By understanding these rights, we empower ourselves to participate in that conversation, to advocate for our freedoms, and to help shape a future where our oldest values continue to protect us in a brand new world. Thanks so much for watching and for taking this journey through the modern-day Bill of Rights with me. I hope it gave you a new perspective on these foundational freedoms. If you found this interesting or learned something new, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives like this. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you see the Bill of Rights playing out in your digital life? I'd love to hear from you. Stay curious, stay engaged, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're taking a journey across the globe, not to explore different landscapes, but to trace the footsteps of an idea that has shaped nations, sparked revolutions, and defined what it means to be free. We're talking about the global influence of the U.S. Bill of Rights. It's a story that goes far beyond America's borders, proving that the hunger for liberty is a universal language. When the U.S. Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791, it was a radical experiment. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution weren't just a set of laws. They were a bold declaration that individual freedoms like speech, religion, and due process were inherent and deserved protection from government overreach. This wasn't just an American concept, it was a human concept, and the world was watching. One of the earliest and most direct echoes of the Bill of Rights can be seen in the French Revolution. Just 2 years before the Bill of Rights was ratified, France adopted its Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in 1789. The parallels are striking. Concepts like the presumption of innocence, freedom of speech, and religious liberty, which were being debated in America, found a powerful voice in France. Figures like Thomas Jefferson, who was the American minister to France at the time, and the Marquis de Lafayette, a hero of the American Revolution, served as a bridge between these two great movements for liberty. The American experiment provided a working model, a tangible example that a government could be founded on the principle of protecting individual rights, not just granting them. This transatlantic dialogue of ideas showed that the flame of freedom, once lit, could easily cross oceans. As the 19th and 20th centuries unfolded, the influence of the Bill of Rights continued to spread, becoming a key source of inspiration for countless nations drafting their own constitutions. Think about it. When a new country is born, or an old one seeks to reform, where does it look for a blueprint for freedom? Often, it looks to the foundational documents that have stood the test of time. Let's take a look at post-World War II Japan. After the war, under Allied occupation. Japan drafted a new constitution in 1947. This document is often called the Peace Constitution, and its chapter on rights and duties reads like a modern-day counterpart to the Bill of Rights. It guarantees fundamental human rights, including freedom of thought, religion, assembly, and speech. It even includes protections against self-incrimination and unreasonable searches, directly mirroring the Fifth and Fourth Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. The American model provided a clear and proven framework for establishing a democratic society built on individual liberties. Similarly, in post-war Germany, the framers of the Basic Law also drew inspiration from the American system. They were determined to create a stable democracy that would prevent the atrocities of the past from ever happening again. Their constitution places an incredible emphasis on the inviolability of human dignity and fundamental rights, making them a cornerstone of the new German state. The influence is clear. The idea that certain rights are so fundamental they must be constitutionally protected from any government action. This ripple effect didn't stop there. Across Latin America, as nations gained independence and struggled to establish stable democracies, many incorporated principles from the U.S. Bill of Rights into their own legal systems. The rights to a fair trial, freedom of the press, and the right to petition the government became common features in constitutions throughout the hemisphere. Each nation adapted these principles to its own unique cultural and historical context, but the foundational DNA is often traceable back to those first 10 amendments. Perhaps the most significant legacy of the Bill of Rights on the world stage is its contribution to international human rights law. After the horrors of World War II, the global community came together with a shared mission to define and protect the fundamental rights of all people, everywhere. This led to the creation of the United Nations and the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. Eleanor Roosevelt, a key figure in drafting the UDHR, often drew upon the American tradition of rights as a reference point. The Declaration proclaims that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. At least, rights that are familiar to any student of the Bill of Rights: the right to life, liberty, and security of person, freedom from torture, freedom of opinion and expression, and the right to a fair trial. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights took the principles enshrined for one nation and universalized them, setting a common standard of achievement for all nations. It became the bedrock for subsequent international treaties and covenants, creating a global framework for human rights that continues to evolve today. The Bill of Rights wasn't just a national document anymore. It had become part of humanity's shared heritage. Of course, this influence is not a one-way street, and the story isn't without its complexities. The United States itself has often struggled to live up to the ideals of its own Bill of Rights. Throughout history, the fight for civil rights for all Americans has been a long and arduous journey, and that struggle has, in turn, inspired movements for justice and equality around the world. The American Civil Rights Movement, for instance, which fought to make the promises of the Constitution a reality for African Americans, became a powerful symbol for anti-apartheid activists in South Africa and other freedom fighters globally. This shows that the asterisk of the Bill of Rights is sometimes even more powerful than its application. It represents a promise, a standard against which citizens can hold their governments accountable. When activists in Hong Kong demand freedom of the press, or when dissidents in repressive regimes call for the right to speak freely, they are tapping into the same universal principles that James Madison and the founders articulated over 200 years ago. The Bill of Rights serves as a powerful symbol of defiance against tyranny and a beacon of hope for those living under oppression. It gives them a language to demand their freedom and a framework to imagine a more just society. So, what is the ultimate legacy of the Bill of Rights beyond America's borders? It's the enduring idea that power must have limits, and that every individual possesses inherent rights that no government can take away. It's a legacy seen in the constitutions of new democracies, in the halls of the United Nations, and in the hearts of protesters demanding a better future. The Bill of Rights is more than just a piece of parchment. It's a living, breathing document whose influence continues to shape our world in profound ways. It reminds us that the fight for freedom is a global one, and that the principles of liberty, once articulated, can inspire generations across continents. Thank you so much for joining me on this historical journey today. If you found this exploration of ideas as fascinating as I do, please give this video a thumbs up, and consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the concepts that shape our world. We love hearing from you, so please drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our journey through history. Today, we arrive at a pivotal moment, a testament to the enduring power of an idea, the eternal promise of freedom. We've explored the origins, the debates, and the ratification of the Bill of Rights. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, that was just the beginning. Chapter 19 is about the life of these 10 amendments, their journey through the turbulent waters of American history. Think about it. These weren't just words on parchment. They were a shield, forged in the fires of revolution, intended to protect the individual from the overwhelming power of the state. But would they hold? Would this shield withstand the pressures of a nation destined to face civil war, economic depressions, global conflicts, and profound social upheaval? This is the central question we'll explore. Let's start by considering the sheer scope of what these amendments have faced. From the Alien and Sedition Acts in the late 18th century, which directly challenged the First Amendment, to the suspension of habeas corpus during the Civil War, the very foundations of these rights have been tested. In the 20th century, 2 world wars brought about new questions regarding free speech, censorship, and national security. The Red Scares saw fears of political ideology clash with the freedom of association. Each of these moments was a crucible. Each crisis forced Americans to ask themselves, what do these rights truly mean? Are they absolute? Or can they be limited in times of emergency? It's a debate that is echoed in courtrooms, legislative halls, and public squares for over 2 centuries. The Supreme Court became the primary battleground, with landmark cases shaping and reshaping our understanding of each amendment. Think of cases like Asterisk, Schenck v. United States Asterisk, which introduced the clear and present danger test for speech, or Asterisk, Gideon v. Wainwright Asterisk, which affirmed the right to an attorney for everyone, not just those who could afford one. These legal battles weren't just abstract legal theory. They had real-world consequences for ordinary people. They determined whether a protester could be arrested, whether a newspaper could publish a controversial story, whether a person accused of a crime would receive a fair trial. The history of the Bill of Rights is a human story, a story of struggle, of victories, and sometimes of heartbreaking setbacks. And yet, through all this turmoil, the amendments have endured. They have proven to be remarkably resilient. Why? Perhaps it's because they are more than just laws. They represent a fundamental aspiration, a promise of what a society can and should be. They are a statement of values, that individual liberty matters, that the government should be accountable, and that justice should be accessible to all. This enduring power is what makes them a guiding light. When the nation has lost its way, when fear has threatened to overwhelm reason, it's the principles of the Bill of Rights that have often called us back. Think of the Civil Rights Movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and countless others didn't seek to create new rights. They demanded that the nation live up to the promises it had already made. They used the First Amendment's guarantees of speech, press, and assembly to challenge injustice and demand equality. They leveraged the 14th Amendment, which extended the protections of the Bill of Rights to the states, to dismantle segregation. The Bill of Rights became their blueprint for a more just and equitable America. This pattern repeats itself throughout our history. Activists for women's suffrage, labor rights, and LGBTQ rights have all stood on the foundation built by these 10 amendments. They have used the tools of freedom to expand the definition of we the people. The amendments are not a static document. They are a living, breathing part of our national conversation. Their meaning is constantly being debated, refined, and expanded by each new generation. In times of political division, it's easy to become cynical. We see our ideals tested, and we wonder if they still hold meaning. But the history of the Bill of Rights teaches us a powerful lesson in hope. It shows that even in the darkest of times, the promise of freedom can serve as a beacon. It reminds us that progress is not linear and that the fight for liberty is never truly finished. It is a continuous process of striving to better realize the ideals laid out in that foundational text. They are a reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation, vigilance, and a willingness to stand up for the rights of others, even those with whom we disagree. The endurance of these amendments is not magic. It is the result of countless individuals who believed in their importance and fought to protect them. From the lone dissenter to the mass movement, it is people who give these words their power. So, as we conclude this chapter, we see that the Bill of Rights is not merely a historical artifact. It is an eternal promise. It's a promise of freedom, a framework for justice, and a guiding light for democracy. It has weathered the storms of war, survived periods of intense crises, and adapted to challenges its authors could never have imagined. Their journey through time is a testament to the power of an idea, the idea that a government must be constrained and that individual rights are sacred. This idea remains as radical and as essential today as it was over 200 years ago. The story of the Bill of Rights is, ultimately, our story. The ongoing, ever-unfolding story of the American experiment. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of the most important documents in modern history. If you found this exploration meaningful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this. Your support helps us continue to explore these vital stories. We'll see you next time. As we draw the curtains on our journey through the Bill of Rights, we find ourselves at the shores of a vast ocean of history, reflection, and profound meaning. We've explored the 10 Amendments, not merely as legal statutes, but as the very pillars upon which the great American experiment was built. From the soaring freedoms of speech and religion in the First Amendment, to the guarantees of a fair trial and the protection against cruel and unusual punishment, each clause, each phrase, is a testament to a revolutionary idea. That individual liberty is the most precious gift a government can recognize and protect. Think about it. These weren't just abstract principles conceived in a quiet room. They were born from struggle, from experience, and from a deep-seated fear of tyranny. The founders had lived under a system where their homes could be searched without cause, where their opinions could land them in prison, and where their fate could be decided by the whims of a distant monarch. The Bill of Rights was their defiant answer. It was their promise to future generations that this new nation would be different. It was a declaration that power resides with the people, and that the government is their servant, not their master. Consider the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. It's more than just a legal technicality. It's a statement about the sanctity of our personal space. It declares that our homes are our castles, our private lives our own, and that the government cannot intrude without a very good reason. A reason judged not by the intruder, but by an impartial court. This single amendment draws a powerful line in the sand, separating a free society from a police state. It's a right we often take for granted, until it's threatened. And what about the Fifth and Sixth Amendments? The right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the right to a speedy and public trial by a jury of our peers. These are not loopholes for the guilty to exploit. They are essential safeguards to protect the innocent. They ensure that justice is not just a concept, but a practice. They stand as a bulwark against coerced confessions and hasty judgments, reminding us that the process, the journey to a verdict, is as important as the outcome itself. They embody the principle that it is better for the guilty to go free than for one innocent person to be wrongly punished. That is a profound moral commitment for a nation to make. Throughout our exploration, we've seen how these rights are not static relics. They are living, breathing principles that we reinterpret and reapply with every new generation. The challenges of the digital age, the complexities of modern society, these are the new arenas where the battles for liberty are fought. How does the First Amendment apply to social media? How does the Fourth Amendment protect our digital data? These are not questions with easy answers. They are questions that we, the inheritors of this legacy, are called upon to debate, to consider, and to answer. The Bill of Rights is a conversation across time. It's the framers speaking to us, and us, through our courts, our legislatures, and our public discourse, speaking by. This dialogue is essential. It's messy, it's often contentious, but it is the lifeblood of our republic. When we engage in this conversation, when we argue about the meaning of our rights, we are not weakening them, we are strengthening them. We are polishing the pillars of our liberty, ensuring they can withstand the tests of our time. This gift of liberty is not a passive inheritance. It's a responsibility. It requires our vigilance, our participation, and our courage. It requires us to understand our rights so that we can recognize when they are being eroded. It requires us to respect the rights of others, even those with whom we vehemently disagree, because the erosion of their liberty is the first step toward the erosion of our own. Benjamin Franklin's famous warning still echoes today. We have a republic, if we can keep it. Keeping it means cherishing and defending the principles enshrined in the Bill of Rights. It's a framework that allows for protests and dissent, for innovation and progress. It's what allows a free press to hold the powerful accountable and what allows ordinary citizens to petition their government for change. It's the foundation that allows for a marketplace of ideas, where the best concepts can rise to the top through reason and debate, not through force. It is, in its essence, a charter of human dignity. It asserts that every individual has inherent worth and is entitled to a sphere of personal autonomy that no government has the right to invade. As we conclude, let us remember that the story of the Bill of Rights is not just a story about the past. It's a story about the present and a guide for the future. It's a reminder that freedom isn't free. It was bought at a great price, and it is maintained by the constant effort of each generation. It's a challenge to each of us to be informed, to be engaged, and to be brave guardians of the liberties we have been so fortunate to inherit. The Bill of Rights was not just ink on paper. It was the voice of a free people, whispering through centuries, reminding us that liberty must always be defended. It is the sacred promise of our past and the enduring hope for our future. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. If you found this series valuable, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations into the ideas that shape our world. Until next time, stay curious and stay engaged.